Ellie was in the hospital, and she was in so much pain that it felt like the walls of the room echoed with her cries. Her babies were about to be born, and she was scared but also excited. But then something happened that broke her heart. Lucas, the man Ellie thought loved her more than anything in the world, stood in the room with a cold, mean look on his face. "I'm leaving you," he said, straightening his fancy tie. Ellie's mouth fell open in shock. "What?" she whispered, her voice shaky and full of sadness. Lucas looked down at her, his eyes as cold as ice. "Did you really think I would marry someone like you? My dad told me I had to leave you or I wouldn't get the Prescott family money. I'm not going to lose everything for you." Ellie couldn't believe her ears. Her heart hurt even more than her body, which was already in so much pain from the babies getting ready to come into the world. She remembered how Lucas had seemed so kind and loving when they first met at the cafe where she worked. He used to tell her how special she was, take her to fancy restaurants, and even promise to love her forever. When she told him she was going to have triplets, he asked her to marry him. It all felt like a dream. But now it was like that dream had turned into a nightmare. "But you said you loved me," Ellie said, tears streaming down her face. Lucas let out a laugh, but it wasn't a nice laugh. It was cold and mean. "Love? Ellie, it was fun while it lasted, but that's all it was. You were just a distraction. My dad made it clear, it's either you or the family fortune, and I chose the fortune." Another wave of pain hit Ellie, and she clutched the hospital bed, groaning. Lucas took a step back, as if he didn't want to be near her. Then he reached into his jacket and pulled out an envelope. He tossed it onto the bed like it was nothing. "There's some money in there," Lucas said. "It should help you for a while. Goodbye, Ellie." And just like that, Lucas walked out of the room, leaving Ellie alone. She stared at the door, hoping he would come back, but he didn't. Ellie felt so sad and angry. But then she made a promise to herself and her babies. "I don't need him," she thought. "I will love my children and take care of them no matter what." Soon the nurses rushed into the room and Ellie got ready to meet her babies. The pain was so much, but she didn't give up. After what felt like forever, she heard the first tiny cry, then another, then another. Ellie smiled through her tears as the nurses brought her 3 beautiful baby girls. Each one had a little bit of red hair, just like her. "Lila, Zoe, and Emma," Ellie whispered, giving each of her daughters a kiss. "It's us against the world now, my little ones." While Ellie was holding her babies and promising to be the best mom ever, Lucas was in a fancy office in Boston with his dad, Lucas II. "Did you end it with her?" his dad asked, crossing his arms. Lucas nodded. "Yes, Ellie is out of our lives." "Good," his dad said with a nod. "You made the right choice. Love and emotions don't belong in the life of a Prescott, only business matters." Lucas didn't say anything. He just poured himself a drink and pretended he was fine. But deep down, he felt like he had made a terrible mistake. Back at the hospital, Ellie looked out the window at the city lights. The envelope of money Lucas left was still sitting on the bed, untouched. She didn't want it. She didn't need it. "We'll make it on our own," she whispered to her sleeping babies. "We don't need him or his money." That night, Ellie began to plan a new life for herself and her daughters. She didn't know how she would do it, but she knew she had to try. 5 years later, Ellie was living in Portland, Oregon with her triplets. It was a sunny morning, and the 3 girls, Lila, Zoe, and Emma, were starting at a new school. They were so excited and nervous at the same time. Ellie walked with them to the school gates, holding Zoe's hand while Emma and Lila skipped ahead. Each girl had a colorful lunchbox and a backpack that seemed almost too big for their small frames. "Are you ready for your first day?" Ellie asked with a big smile. Lila, the brave one, jumped up and down. "Yes! I can't wait to make new friends." Zoe, the shy one, held Ellie's hand a little tighter. "What if nobody likes us?" Emma, the quiet one, didn't say anything. She just looked at her mom with big, curious eyes. Ellie knelt down so she was at their level. Remember what I always tell you? You are strong, smart, and kind. If someone doesn't like you, it's their loss because you are amazing. The girls smiled and hugged their mom. Then they ran through the school gates, waving goodbye. Ellie watched them go, feeling proud and a little nervous. It was hard to let them go, even just for a school day. Life had been tough since that night in the hospital. Ellie had to work very hard to take care of her daughters. She rented a tiny apartment, worked during the day, and took classes online at night. After a lot of effort, she got a business degree. Along the way, she met Chloe, a teacher who became her best friend. Chloe helped her find better jobs and told her to believe in herself. Ellie, you're so good at planning things, Chloe would say. You should start your own business. And that's exactly what Ellie did. Now, at 30 years old, she owned a small event planning company. It wasn't easy, but Ellie was proud of how far she had come. As she walked to her office after dropping the girls off, her phone rang. It was Chloe. "How was the big day?" Chloe asked excitedly. "They just went into their new school," Ellie said, smiling. "They looked so small and nervous, but I know they'll be okay." Chloe laughed. "Of course they'll be okay. They're the daughters of the strongest woman I know." Ellie chuckled, but then sighed. "Sometimes I wonder if I did the right thing, moving so far away and starting over." "You absolutely did the right thing," Chloe said firmly. "And I have some exciting news. Remember that investor I told you about? The one who's interested in your business? He wants to meet with you next week." Ellie's heart raced. "Really? That's amazing." "There's one catch," Chloe added. "The meeting is in San Francisco." Ellie bit her lip. Traveling would mean leaving her daughters, and she rarely did that. "Don't worry," Chloe said. "I can come to Portland and stay with the girls while you're gone. It'll be fun." Ellie felt a wave of gratitude. "Thank you, Chloe. I don't know what I'd do without you." Chloe gave Ellie a kind smile. "If you want to thank me, just make sure you get this big investment," she said warmly. "You deserve it, Ellie. You all do." Ellie waved goodbye to Chloe, her heart filled with gratitude and determination. She continued walking to her office, her heels clicking against the pavement. 5 years ago, she had been abandoned and left to survive on her own, but now things were different. She was on the verge of something big in her career. For the first time in years, she felt unstoppable. What Ellie didn't know was that far away in a tall building in Boston, someone else was thinking about her. Lucas Thurs stood by the wide glass windows of his office at Prescott Enterprises. He held a glass of whiskey in his hand, though he hadn't taken a sip. His assistant had just left, leaving a file on his desk. The file was about a promising events company on the West Coast. Lucas stared at the name written neatly on the cover, Ellie Events. Seeing her name brought back memories he had tried to bury. Fate was about to bring Lucas and Ellie face to face again, and this time the stakes would be even higher. The smooth sound of jazz music filled the air in an elegant restaurant on the 52nd floor of a skyscraper in San Francisco. Ellie adjusted the pearl necklace around her neck. Chloe had given it to her as a good luck charm for this important day. She was dressed in a navy blue dress that made her look professional and confident, and her reddish-brown hair was styled neatly in a bun. "Miss Mason," a deep voice said, pulling her out of her thoughts. Ellie turned to see a tall man with gray hair and a friendly smile standing in front of her. "I'm Maxwell Cooper," he said, holding out his hand. "It's a pleasure to finally meet you in person." Ellie shook his hand and smiled politely. "The pleasure is mine, Mr. Caldwell. Thank you for this opportunity." They were led to their table, and Ellie noticed that Maxwell seemed impressed with her already. She took a deep breath, determined to make the most of this meeting. This was her chance to take her company to the next level, and she wasn't going to let it slip away. As they talked, Ellie spoke passionately about her plans for Ellie Events. Years of hard work had given her the confidence she needed to share her vision clearly. "I must say, Miss Mason," Maxwell said as he enjoyed his meal, "I'm impressed. Your ideas are bold but well thought out. I especially like how you plan to make events luxurious while also being kind to the environment." Ellie nodded, proud of her work. "I believe that today's companies don't just want fancy events, they want events that matter. Combining luxury with care for the planet is the future." Maxwell smiled. "Chloe wasn't exaggerating when she spoke so highly of you. I'm leaning toward." Suddenly, there was a commotion near the restaurant entrance. Ellie turned her head and froze. Standing near the door was Lucas III. Lucas hadn't seen her yet, but Ellie felt panic rising inside her. Her hands shook as memories from 5 years ago flooded back. She hadn't seen him since he had left her while she was pregnant with their triplets. "Miss Mason?" Maxwell asked, looking concerned. "Are you all right?" Ellie forced a smile and nodded. "Yes, I'm fine. I just thought I saw someone I knew." At that moment, Lucas's eyes scanned the room and landed on her. His face showed clear surprise, quickly followed by an expression Ellie couldn't read. Was it guilt, regret, or something else? Lucas spoke briefly to the host, then began walking toward their table. "Ellie?" Lucas said softly, his voice hesitant. "Is it really you?" Maxwell glanced between them, confused. "You two know each other?" Before Ellie could respond, Lucas stepped forward and shook Maxwell's hand. "Lucas III from Prescott Enterprises. Ellie and I met a few years ago in Boston." Maxwell's eyes widened slightly. He clearly recognized the Prescott name and its importance in the business world. Ellie finally found her voice, though it was barely above a whisper. "Lucas, what a surprise." The silence that followed felt heavy, as if filled with words that couldn't be spoken. Finally, Maxwell spoke up. "Well, since you know each other, why don't you join us, Mr. Prescott?" Ellie wanted to say no, to insist that the meeting remain private, but the words wouldn't come out. Lucas hesitated for a moment before nodding. "If it's no trouble, I'd be happy to join," Lucas said, pulling out a chair. As Lucas sat down, Ellie felt like she was in a strange dream. Here she was, sitting with the man who had walked out on her and the man who could change her career forever. Maxwell, unaware of the tension between them, smiled and said, "Lucas, you arrived at the perfect time. Miss Mason was just sharing her exciting plans for her events company." Lucas raised an eyebrow and looked at Ellie. "Impressive. It seems a lot has changed." Ellie met his gaze evenly. "Yes, Lucas, a lot has changed. Life has a way of surprising us, doesn't it?" The rest of the evening felt like a carefully choreographed dance. Ellie presented her ideas with passion and confidence, determined not to let Lucas's presence distract her. Lucas, for his part, contributed thoughtful comments about the market while occasionally glancing at Ellie. By the end of the evening, Maxwell looked pleased. "Miss Mason," he said with a smile, "I must say I'm impressed. Your vision and passion are exactly what we're looking for. Sorry, I think this could be the start of a very promising partnership." Ellie felt a wave of relief and joy. She had done it. Even with Lucas there, she hadn't let the past ruin her future. As they stood to leave, Lucas gently touched Ellie's arm. "Ellie," he said softly, "I need to talk to you. Please, can we meet in private?" Ellie hesitated. Her emotions were all over the place. Part of her wanted to scream at him, to demand answers for the years of abandonment. But another part of her, quieter and harder to ignore, was curious. Finally, she nodded. "We can meet for coffee tomorrow morning, before I fly back to Portland." Lucas nodded, relief and nervousness in his eyes. "Thank you, Ellie. I'll see you tomorrow." The next morning, San Francisco was cold and gray. Ellie tightened her scarf around her neck as she walked to the cafe where she had agreed to meet Lucas. Her heart pounded, a mix of anxiety and resentment swirling inside her. When she arrived, Lucas was already sitting at a table outside. 2 steaming cups of coffee sat in front of him. He stood when he saw her, offering a hesitant smile. "Ellie," he said, "thank you for coming." Ellie sat down without saying hello. The The silence between them felt heavy, like a wall of unspoken words. Finally, Lucas spoke. "You look amazing, Ellie. Success suits you." Ellie raised an eyebrow, her voice cold. "What do you want, Lucas? After 5 years, why now?" Lucas looked down, guilt etched on his face. "I wanted to say I'm sorry. I know it's not enough. Nothing I say will ever be enough. But I need you to know that I regret what I did to you and to our children." Ellie stiffened. The mention of her children felt like a sharp pain. "It isn't enough, but they're fine. They're happy, healthy, and loved without you." Lucas looked crushed. "I deserve that," he said softly. "I deserve your anger. But I want to make things right. I want to be part of their lives, your life, if you'll let me." Ellie stared at him, her emotions swirling. Anger, hurt, confusion, and deep down, a flicker of hope. "Why now, Lucas?" she finally asked. "Why after all this time?" Lucas hesitated. "I've been thinking about it for a long time. I tried to find you in Boston, but you were gone. Then last night, seeing you, so strong, so successful, I realized what I had lost. Please, Ellie, I just want a chance to know them." Ellie closed her eyes, her thoughts racing. When she opened them again, her decision was clear. She took a deep breath and spoke. Lucas's voice was quiet but serious as he looked at Ellie. "I know I don't deserve this, but I want to meet the girls. I miss them, even though I've never really been there for them. I know it's up to you, but I just want a chance." Ellie's face stayed firm, though her heart felt torn. "Lucas, I can't say no to the girls meeting their father, but it will happen my way. I'll talk to them first. I'll explain everything as best as I can. If and only if they want to meet you, then we can plan something. Do you understand?" Relief washed over Lucas's face. He nodded quickly. "Thank you, Ellie. That's more than I deserve." Ellie crossed her arms and narrowed her eyes. "You're right, Lucas. It is more than you deserve. Let me make one thing clear. If you hurt them or walk away from them again, there won't be another chance. Ever. Do you understand?" Lucas's voice grew even more serious. "I understand, Ellie. I promise. I won't let them down again." As they prepared to say goodbye, Lucas hesitated. Ellie noticed the look on his face. "What is it?" she asked. "There's something else I need to tell you about the meeting last night," Lucas said slowly. Ellie's stomach tightened. "What do you mean? What about the meeting?" Lucas took a deep breath. "The man we met, Maxwell Cooper, isn't just some regular investor. He represents a group. Prescott Enterprises is part of it." Ellie's heart stopped for a moment. "You mean Prescott Enterprises? Your family's company?" Lucas nodded. "Yes. If the deal goes through, Prescott Enterprises will own part of your company." Ellie felt like the floor was shaking under her. Her company, her dream, something she'd spent years building, would now be tied to Lucas's family. "I need time," she muttered, taking a step back. "This is too much, Lucas. Too much all at once." Lucas nodded. "Take all the time you need. I mean it. But Ellie, please think about the girls. No matter what happens with the company, I want to be part of their lives." Ellie didn't respond. She turned and walked away, her mind spinning with thoughts. Lucas stood there, watching her leave. He knew it wouldn't be easy to win back Ellie's trust or to earn a place in his daughters' lives. But he also knew he had to try. As the plane took off from San Francisco, Ellie gazed out the window at the clouds. Her mind was a whirlwind of questions and fears. Should she accept the investment? If she did, it would mean a huge leap forward for her company. She could expand, hire more people, and achieve dreams she'd had for years. But it also meant being connected to Lucas and his family forever. And what about the girls? How could she tell them that their father, who they'd never met, suddenly wanted to be in their lives? They were happy now, carefree. She didn't want to risk hurting them. By the time the plane landed in Portland, Ellie still didn't have answers. But one thing was clear. Whatever she decided, it would be for her daughter's best. They were the most important part of her life. At home, Ellie's house was filled with the sound of laughter. Her three daughters, Lila, Zoe, and Emma, all 5 years old, were playing a silly game with Chloe, their babysitter. Chloe had stayed to help out while Ellie was on her trip. Ellie stood in the doorway watching them, her heart squeezed with love and worry. The girls looked so happy. How could she bring such a big change into their lives? Chloe noticed Ellie standing there and came into the kitchen. "You've barely said a word since you got home. Are you okay?" Ellie sighed. "Chloe, you won't believe what happened." Chloe sat down and listened as Ellie explained everything. She told her about meeting Lucas, the investment deal with his family's company, and Lucas's request to meet the girls. When Ellie finished, Chloe sat back, wide-eyed. "Wow, that's a lot to handle." Ellie nodded. "I just don't know what to do, Chloe. On one hand, the investment could be incredible for the company. We could grow, reach new places, and make my dream bigger than I ever imagined. But if I take it, I'll be tied to Lucas. Forever. And then there are the girls. How do I even begin to explain this to them? They don't even know him." Chloe put a comforting hand on Ellie's shoulder. "I can't tell you what to do, but I know you'll figure it out. You always put the girls first." Just then, Emma walked into the kitchen. Her big brown eyes looked worried. "Mommy, are you sad?" she asked softly. Ellie knelt down and hugged Emma tight. "No, sweetie. Mommy's just thinking about some important things." Emma hugged her back. "It's okay, Mommy. You always fix everything." Ellie smiled, tears welling in her eyes. "Thank you, Emma. You're my brave girl." That evening, Ellie gathered her 3 daughters in the living room. Chloe stayed nearby to support her. "Girls," Ellie began nervously, "remember how we talk about families sometimes? How some kids have a mommy and daddy, some have 2 mommies or 2 daddies, and some, like you, have just 1 mommy?" The girls nodded, their little faces full of curiosity. "Well," Ellie continued, her voice soft, "while I was on my trip, I met someone. Your father." The room went silent. Lila, the boldest of the 3, was the first to speak. "We have a father?" Ellie nodded. "Yes, sweetheart. Everyone has a father, even if he's not around. Your father wasn't ready to be a dad when you were born, but now he says he wants to meet you." Zoe, who was always more cautious, frowned. "Why didn't he come before?" Ellie sighed, choosing her words carefully. "Sometimes grown-ups make mistakes, Zoe. Your father wasn't ready back then, but now he wants to try." Lila's face lit up with excitement. "What's he like? Does he like puppies? Does he have a car? Can we meet him tomorrow?" Zoe stayed quiet, her little brow furrowed. Emma, the most thoughtful, simply watched Ellie and her sisters. "You don't have to decide anything now," Ellie assured them. "This is big news and we all need time to think about it, okay?" The girls nodded, though Lila still had a million questions. That night, after the girls were asleep, Ellie made a big decision. She picked up her phone and called Maxwell Cooper. "Mr. Caldwell," she said, "I've made a decision about the investment. I have some conditions." Maxwell listened as Ellie explained. When she finished, he paused. "Your conditions are unusual, Miss Mason, but I think we can work something out. Congratulations." Ellie hung up, feeling a mix of relief and nervousness. Her company's future was secure, but she knew the hardest part was yet to come. She picked up the phone again and dialed another number. "Lucas," she said when he answered, "we need to talk about the girls. If you want to be part of their lives, there will be rules, and you need to follow them." Lucas's voice was steady. "I understand, Ellie, whatever it takes." Meanwhile, in Boston, Lucas sat in his office, staring out the window. A glass of whiskey sat untouched on his desk. His assistant had just left, leaving behind a report about Ellie's company. Lucas flipped through it, feeling a mix of pride and regret. Ellie had built something amazing. He couldn't help but think about how much he had lost by walking away from her years ago. His phone rang, breaking his thoughts. "Son," his father's voice boomed, "I've heard about this investment in an events company on the West Coast. I want all the details on my desk tomorrow morning." Lucas hesitated. He hadn't told his father about Ellie or the girls yet. "Yes, Dad, I'll have everything ready." After hanging up, Lucas sat in silence. Then, with a determined sigh, he picked up a pen and a piece of paper. He began to write a letter. "Dear Lila, Zoe, and Emma," he wrote, "there's so much I want to tell you, so much I want to share." He poured his heart into the words, hoping his daughters would someday read them and understand. 3 months later, autumn leaves painted Portland in beautiful shades of red and gold. Ellie's company was thriving. They had opened a new office in Seattle, and her dream was growing bigger every day. At home, life was busy but happy. Ellie juggled her work with her role as a loving mom. She still didn't have all the answers, but she knew one thing for sure: her daughters came first. They always would. As she prepared breakfast for the girls one Saturday morning, Ellie looked out the window. The road ahead wasn't easy, but for the first time in a long while, she felt hopeful. Ellie sat in her cozy office, her mind spinning from the intense negotiation she just finished with Maxwell Cooper. The deal had taken weeks of back and forth, but at last they reached an agreement that would allow her company to grow while letting her remain in control. It was a victory, but before she could even take a moment to celebrate, a small voice pulled her back to the present. "Mom, when will we see Dad again?" Lila asked, her voice soft and curious. Ellie looked up to see her 3 daughters, Lila, Zoe, and Emma, standing in the doorway. They each had their own expressions. Lila's face was open and eager, while Zoe's was closed and guarded. Emma, the quietest of the 3, just stood silently, watching everything with her sharp eyes. Ellie smiled gently. "He's coming to visit us this afternoon. Don't you remember? We're having a picnic in the park." Lila clapped her hands, her excitement clear. Zoe, on the other hand, frowned. She slumped into the nearest chair and poked at her breakfast with her fork. "Do I have to go?" she muttered. Ellie's heart ached. She knelt next to Zoe, brushing her daughter's hair out of her face. "Sweetheart," she said softly, "I know this is hard and confusing. It's okay to feel upset. But giving your dad a chance doesn't mean you're betraying me or our family. It's okay to have mixed feelings about it." Zoe stared at her plate, not responding. Emma, as usual, then was the first to act. She reached over and took Zoe's hand in hers. "It's okay, Zoe. We'll be together," she said in her small but wise voice. Ellie smiled, amazed at her youngest daughter's maturity. "That's right," she added. "We'll be together, and I promise everything will be okay." Later that afternoon, Ellie found herself sitting on a park bench, watching from a distance as Lucas played with the girls. He had brought a bright, colorful kite, and now he was showing them how to fly it. Lila ran across the grass, laughing loudly as the kite soared higher into the sky. Zoe, who had been reluctant to come, stood off to the side at first, but soon she joined in. Ellie could see a small reluctant smile creeping onto Zoe's face as she held the kite string. Chloe, Ellie's best friend, walked up carrying a basket filled with food for the picnic. "He's trying hard," Chloe said, nodding toward Lucas and the girls. Ellie sighed. "Yes, he is, but I still worry. What if he hurts them again?" Chloe sat down next to Ellie, placing a comforting hand on her shoulder. "Ellie, it's okay to be scared, but look at them. You've raised 3 strong, smart girls. They're happy, and they'll be okay no matter what happens." Lucas glanced over at them then, meeting Ellie's eyes. He gave her a small, hesitant smile. For a moment she hesitated, but then she smiled back. It surprised her how natural the gesture felt. The last few weeks had been an emotional roller coaster, filled with doubt and fear, but seeing her daughters laughing and playing made Ellie feel like she had made the right decision to give Lucas another chance. That evening, after the picnic was over and the girls had gone to bed, Ellie sat on the balcony of her home, a warm cup of tea in her hands. She looked out at the quiet, moonlit streets, lost in her thoughts. Soft footsteps interrupted her, and she turned to see Lucas walking onto the balcony. He had stayed behind after the picnic to help clean up, and now he carried his own mug of tea. "They're amazing, Ellie," he said, sitting down in the chair next to her. His voice was soft and full of emotion. You've done such a wonderful job raising them. Ellie looked at him, her face a mix of pride and sadness. They're my life, Lucas. Every decision I've made in the past 5 years has been for them. Lucas was quiet for a moment, staring out at the horizon. When he spoke again, his voice was serious. I know I can't fix the past, Ellie. I've made mistakes, but I want you to know that I'm here now, and I'm going to be the father they deserve. I'm committed to them. Ellie studied him carefully, searching his face for any sign of doubt. What she saw instead was sincerity and determination. I believe you, Lucas, she said finally, but trust takes time to rebuild. You'll have to prove yourself, not just to me, but to them. Lucas nodded. I know, and I will. The two sat in comfortable silence for a while, the tension between them easing. It was a silence filled with understanding and a shared hope for the future. A week later, as Christmas approached, Ellie found herself facing a new challenge. I don't want to go! Zoe's voice echoed through the living room as she glared at her mother. Ellie sighed, rubbing her temples. The idea of spending Christmas in Boston with Lucas's family had stirred up strong feelings in the girls, especially Zoe. Sweetheart, Ellie began, trying to keep her voice calm, your father wants you to meet the rest of the family. It's important to him. Lila, always the most enthusiastic, jumped up and down. It'll be fun, Zoe. We can build snowmen. Zoe crossed her arms, her frown deepening. I don't care about snowmen. I don't want to go. Emma, as usual, stayed quiet, her eyes moving from her sisters to her mother. She didn't say much, but Ellie could tell she was paying attention to every word. The sound of the doorbell interrupted the conversation. Ellie opened the door to find Lucas standing there, covered in snow and holding 3 brightly wrapped presents. Ho, 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 he said with a laugh, stepping inside. Lila squealed with excitement, running to grab the presents, but Zoe's face remained closed off. I don't want presents, Zoe said stubbornly, and I don't want to go to Boston. Lucas knelt down in front of Zoe, his voice soft and understanding. I know this is a big change, Zoe, but how about we make a deal? If you don't like it, we'll come back sooner. What do you think? Zoe hesitated, glancing at Ellie for reassurance. Ellie gave her a small, encouraging nod. Okay, Zoe murmured finally. But you promise? I promise, Lucas said, holding out his pinky. Zoe hooked her pinky with his, sealing the deal. That night, after the girls were asleep, Ellie and Lucas sat in the kitchen with mugs of hot chocolate. Do you think we're doing the right thing? Ellie asked quietly. Taking them to Boston? Lucas sighed, running a hand through his hair. I don't know, but I do know we can't keep them separate from my family forever. They're part of my life, and I want them to know where they come from. Ellie nodded slowly. She understood his point, even if it wasn't easy. How's the company doing? She asked, changing the subject. Lucas's face brightened. Actually, I have some exciting news. Remember that idea we talked about, expanding your company to bigger events? The board loved it. They want to make it an official partnership and bring it to the East Coast. Ellie's heart raced. It was an incredible opportunity, but it also felt overwhelming. That's amazing, she said. But what about your father? Did he agree? Lucas's smile faded slightly. He wasn't happy about it. He still has his doubts about our family arrangement, but in the end, even he couldn't argue with the business potential. Ellie thought about the possibilities. It would be a big step, but one that could change everything for her business and her family. Suddenly, a scream from the girls' room shattered the quiet. Ellie and Lucas both jumped up and rushed to see what had happened. They found Emma sitting up in bed, tears streaming down her face. Lila and Zoe were already by her side, trying to comfort her. It's okay, sweetheart, Ellie said, pulling Emma into a hug. It was just a bad dream. Emma sniffled, her small hands clutching Ellie's shirt. Then she turned and held out her hand toward Lucas. Daddy, she said softly, her voice trembling. Lucas froze for a moment, clearly caught off guard. It was the first time Emma had called him Daddy. Slowly, He sat on the edge of the bed and took her hand. "I'm here, princess," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Daddy's here." Ellie watched, her heart full of a mix of emotions she couldn't even begin to name. Seeing Lucas with the girls like this, being the father they needed, was something she had never imagined. She took a deep breath and looked at Lucas. "Let's do it," she said softly. "The expansion to the East Coast. Let's give it a try." Lucas looked at her, surprised. "Are you sure?" Ellie nodded. "Yes, but we'll do it together, for the business and for our family." Ellie felt strong and hopeful as she looked around her. She knew her family could handle anything together. Outside in Portland, soft snowflakes fell, covering everything like a big, fluffy white blanket. It was like nature was giving them a clean start, a fresh page to create their story. 2 years later, the scene was completely different. In Boston, the warm summer sun lit up the beautiful garden of the Prescott mansion. Ellie, wearing a pretty navy blue dress, smiled as she watched her triplets run across the grass, chasing bright balloons. "Hey, daydreamer," said Chloe, her best friend, standing nearby with a glass of champagne. "What's on your mind?" Chloe's knowing smile made Ellie laugh. "Sometimes I still can't believe all of this is real," Ellie said. The sound of happy children brought her attention back to the garden. Her daughters, Lila, Zoe, and Emma, who were now 7, were busy on a treasure hunt. The hunt was organized by none other than Lucas II, the once serious and stern grandfather. "Grandpa! Grandpa!" Lila shouted, running up to him. "We found another clue." Lucas's face softened with a warm smile. "Well done, my dear. Let's see what it says." Ellie couldn't help but feel amazed. This man, who once seemed cold, had completely changed. At first, he'd been distant, but over time his granddaughters melted his heart. Now he adored them. As Ellie watched, a young assistant approached her. "Mrs. Mason, there's a call for you. From Portland." Ellie excused herself and took the call. It was Sophie Turner, her manager, with news about Ellie Events' latest project. Over the past 2 years, Ellie's event planning business had grown bigger than she'd ever imagined. With offices now in Portland, Boston, New York, and Chicago, her company was one of the best in the country. As Ellie finished the call, Lucas came up behind her. "Everything okay?" he asked. Ellie nodded. "Yes, just finishing up some details for an event." Lucas smiled proudly. "You've built something amazing, Ellie. I'm so impressed by everything you've done." Ellie felt warmth spread through her as she looked at him. "I didn't do it alone. I couldn't have done it without you." Just then, Zoe called out, "Mommy, Daddy, come look!" Smiling, Ellie and Lucas went to see what the girls had found. Under a bush, the girls had discovered a fancy box. "Treasure!" Emma exclaimed. Lucas opened the box carefully. Inside were 3 shiny necklaces with heart-shaped pendants. "Oh, Daddy!" Lila whispered. "They're so pretty." Lucas's eyes glistened as he explained. "These belong to my grandmother. She always said they would go to the most important women in the family, and that's you 3. He gently placed the necklaces around each girl's neck. Ellie's heart was so full it felt like it might burst. She thought about how far she'd come, from a scared young girl left alone in a hospital to this moment surrounded by love. "Where did you go?" Lucas asked softly, noticing her deep in thought. Ellie smiled, tears shining in her eyes. "Just thinking about how we got here." Lucas took her hand, looking serious but full of love. "Ellie, there's something I've been wanting to ask you." Her heart started beating faster as he knelt down and pulled out a little velvet box. "Ellie," Lucas began, his voice shaking just a little, "you've given me a second chance at life. You've shown me love, strength, and forgiveness. I love you. I love our daughters, and I want to spend the rest of my life with you. Will you marry me?" Ellie's eyes filled with happy tears as she looked at him, their daughters, and all the friends who had gathered to watch. Memories of all they'd been through flashed in her mind. "Yes," she said softly, then louder. "Yes, Lucas, I'll marry you." The girls squealed with joy, hugging their parents, while everyone around clapped and cheered. Lucas placed a sparkling ring on Ellie's finger. She noticed with a smile that it matched the necklaces perfectly. Later that night, while the party continued, Ellie stood on the terrace, looking out at the Boston lights. Lucas joined her, wrapping his arms around her. "A penny for your thoughts?" he asked. Ellie leaned into him. "Just thinking about how amazing life is. 7 years ago, I never would have believed we'd be here." Lucas chuckled softly. "Sometimes I wonder if I deserve all this." Ellie turned to him, placing a hand on his cheek. "You do, Lucas. We do. We've worked hard and built this life together. With love." Their daughters interrupted, running up with excited smiles. "Mommy! Daddy! Grandpa says we can light lanterns in the garden." Hand in hand, Ellie and Lucas followed their giggling girls. Together, they lit the lanterns and watched as they floated into the dark sky, glowing like tiny stars. Ellie felt full of peace and happiness. The lanterns were like their hopes and dreams rising into the night. She knew this wasn't the end of their story, just the start of a wonderful new chapter. Thank you for watching. If you like this story and want to see more, please subscribe to our channel. That way you won't miss any new videos. Give us a thumbs up if you enjoyed it, and share what you think in the comments. We love hearing your thoughts. Also, don't forget to check out the other videos on our channel. We'll see you in the next story.